India is a massive fucking country, and there is also a bunch of additional that, like, you know, southern northern. There's the southern northern Indian divide. There are caste differences. Like, all of this stuff is why even if you dive into like the Indian side of Twitter and try to comprehend like what kind of new levels of racism are happening there. I mean, it's not even the quiet part out loud. This is when the right used to be very open about this sort of thing. At a time when what do you call it? Bernie Sanders used to say open borders are a right-wing Koch brothers back policy, because it technically was. Issue in Canada is a bit different. Youth unemployment is at record highs due to corporations using temporary foreign workers to ensure waste suppression. Indians in Canada are facing the backlash because most are Indian. Blame needs to be on the corporations looking for cheap labor rather than the people looking for a better life. Unwilling to take has been expressly modeled to run off of exploited labor. Yes. No, American manufacturing and American capitalism is entirely funded off the backs of hyper exploited migrant labor, whether documented or undocumented. That's it. It's endless profit seeking. And the way to stop that is not by stopping undocumented migration or H-1B visas. It's to create legal safeguards to ensure that everyone is paid, like everyone's pay rates are adjusted, and that you can't take advantage of people's currency exchange rate, or you can't take advantage of people's like legal status. The problem is that is left-wing economic policy that everybody fucking freaks out about. So that's the reason why we'll never have it, and that's the reason why we'll have this instead. Shiv Arur, journalist from India Today, saying, not all Americans, Loomer, just...
I went on a date with an Indian man, and it was...
Here's Kavernickel talking about racism against Indians are out of control on social media. In parentheses, this is insane.
The worst experience of my life.
I gotta go pee real quick.
Who he invited on our date. So this happened while I was living and dating in New York City. Matched with this cute Indian guy on Tinder, very smart, successful. And on a few dates, and in the beginning, he was very upfront and straightforward with me, and he told me that he was best friends with one of his exes. That experience left such a bad taste in my mouth that I actually stayed away from dating Indian men after that. Let me know what you guys think. Like, is this normal? Did I overreact?
So India is a country with 1,450,000,000 people. It has 121 languages, 270 mother tongues, and nearly 20,000 dialects spoken in India. It's fair to say India is an absolutely massive country, and it's called a subcontinent for a reason. It is far bigger than most countries, it's far more diverse than most countries, but for a lot of us Westerners, we think of an Indian as just a very certain type of person. And it's safe to say these days, the PR for India online has not been good, both fairly in terms of criticising its government and also supporters of the BJP supporting Israel, and also unfairly because loads of stuff has been going viral where people pick it up and then demonise the whole of Indian society, which, you know, I'm already outlining is insanely diverse. So finding one TikTok about a bad experience traveling and then painting the whole of India with that is just really, really insane because, yes, anti-Indian racism has gotten absolutely out of control on social media, especially in Western countries, where it's just completely acceptable to say the most racist shit about Indians and pretend you're hiding behind some sort of like progressive, like woke politics. So recently something that's contributed to this, especially in Canada, is there's been a pretty big surge in Indian migration to Canada. And India is, of course, a very populated country, but it also has a good education system, and a lot of people speak English. So for the Canadian immigration system, they fit the bill, especially if they want to go study in Canada for university. And that's what a lot of the immigration has revolved around. A lot of people who are students going to Canada and maybe picking up student jobs on the side or going into even further education, like a master's program or a PhD program, and being able to stay in Canada for a longer time. Now, we're going to talk about other things around that as well, But yeah, Canadians have not reacted kindly to this, which is so hilarious because Canada is a settler colony. It's built on stolen land. Now you have a bunch of white settlers complaining about immigration. And as you're going to see, a lot of their problems aren't around like economic issues or having a system that's not designed to handle a certain number of problems. A lot of it is purely down to like what they perceive as cultural reasons, including people like not speaking English, which again is very funny considering in Canada a lot of people don't speak great English anyway, like officially, because they speak French instead. So I'm going to talk about all of this today because anti-Indian racism has just become so insanely normalized, and it's actually kind of interesting watching it from like a part of the UK that is like heavily influenced by South Asian culture. And as someone who's grown up in like a very South Asian area as well, and also in a country where we've had obviously like South Asian prime minister, South Asian cabinet ministers at a very high level, although Indian migrants have been demonized a lot in their history, and a lot of like civil rights progress in England has been won through like South Asian migrants winning their civil rights. It's fair to say in terms of non-white migrant groups that Indians in the UK have a pretty positive perception, which seems to be in like direct contrast with the perception in Canada. So yeah, I'm going to talk about all of this today. Please like the video, let me know what you guys think. Follow me on social media at The Tabernacle, mainly on Instagram. Haven't been promoting this stuff recently, but also support me on Patreon and support me through YouTube membership.
Well, so what about that?
Access to the Discord server, and also check out my fundraiser, Medical Aid for Palestinians. We hit the target of 10,000, which is amazing. But if you just want to contribute, it's left up there, and the money goes out like every single week that's been left over. So there is no expiry date on the fundraiser. So if you want to check that out, go check it out. So when I say anti-Indian racism has been normalized, we only need to look to the hell site that is Twitter to see this in action, where people will just say the most racist shit to Indians and not even trying to hide it. So there's a guy called Ishan Sharma, who is an Indian like social media creator, right? So he made a post about tipping in America and how much of a joke it is, right? We could make a whole video about that. But anyway, it's fair to say a lot of people got pretty sensitive about him complaining about tipping in New York. Here are loads of comments.
Tabs glass, a lot of Indians are incredibly especially towards their own kind, turn a blind eye to racism that affects their lives and often aid and abet said racism until it directly affects them. I mean, this is a story. We started off on that side of the story first, and now we're moving into the other side of the story, which is that, first of all, it doesn't matter because racism across the board, especially dished out by the in-group, white people, is always going to be directed at Indians across the board. Ain't nobody's making caste distinctions. Ain't nobody's making caste distinctions or in the United States of America. The first half of the story where I was talking about like the MAGA universe imploding is because there are a shit ton of BJP style right-wing, like incredibly right-wing Indian hogs on Twitter, okay, many of which are in the tech space that love Donald Trump. And now every single other person that voted for Donald Trump, the white guys, are turning on them and going, F you, we're talking about you. You need to leave, bitch. Okay? It was inevitable. It was inevitable that this was going to happen. Okay? That's like the first part of the story, because nobody cares when you're the entirety of white supremacist attitudes come from a silly ass starting point to begin with. The underlying notion that like white people and whiteness is conceptually superior to all other outgroups. It's not coming from like actual I don't know, achievements or anything like that. It is a wholeheartedly spiritual concept. So of course you can't be towards white people, but people sure think you can be. Yeah, I've talked about this before. If you want to experience anti-white racism, you literally have to travel somewhere, okay? You have to travel outside of the Western world to be able to like actually experience it. And even then it's like kind of funny, like Japan, something I've talked about before. Anyway, and yes, we've talked about this before. India is a massive fucking country. And there is also a bunch of additional racism that, like, you know, southern northern, there's the southern northern Indian divide. There are caste differences. Like all of this stuff is why even if you dive into like the Indian side of Twitter and try to comprehend like what kind of new levels of racism are happening there, okay, you know, that in and of itself is completely inconsequential when the much larger, much more powerful force of racism
that, as you will see, have loads of likes. Someone saying, when I visit India, I will spurn local custom and wash my hands. Indians never tip, just like blacks. You are the reason why the globe is becoming racist against Indians. Stop being cheap. So then just randomly, I typed in like India into TikTok, and this is one of the
What qualifies as something you can't be racist towards? Like, wouldn't discrimination still happen? Therefore, race is genuine question. Whiteness is a socio-political concept. Many people that previously were not considered white in American history are now considered white. Greeks, Italians, Polish people, Jewish people, all were once not considered white and a part of the in-group when they were the domineering migrant force coming into the country. If you go far back enough in time and listen to the or read the writings of Benjamin Franklin, for example, he considered Germans to be of swarthy background. He did not consider Nordic people to be white. He only considered WASPs, and maybe with some exceptions because he was getting French pussy on the side, French people to be the only white race. Because whiteness is an ever-expanding concept, and it also can shrink as well. And whiteness is a shrinking concept, depending on which version of whiteness you're operating on. Okay? I've covered this extensively. There's a very famous 15-minute random rant that I went on that I posted on my YouTube page a while back called "White People Do Not Exist," and you can go check that out if you want. But basically, I covered this extensively in that 15-minute rant, all of the historical reference points and whatnot. Okay. So because of that reason, being like anti-white racist is akin to engaging in misandry in a patriarchal society. It's akin to engaging in anti-breeder sentiment, anti-heterosexual sentiment. It's just not a real, tangible, harmful form of discrimination. Okay? Today I learned I don't exist. Yes, whiteness as a political construct is completely created. It's completely crafted. Okay? That's true. After all, look at me. My name is Hasan. I'm Muslim, but I'm white. Okay? I'm white until you reach another white person who's way whiter than me, I guess, who does not consider me to be white. Okay? I'm white as fuck. Anti-white racism is akin to anti-heterosexual bigotry. Okay? There are no real harms. There are no tangible, real systemic harms. Without any sort of real historical or contemporary systemic harm and discrimination, like violence of different systemic background, it's simply mean words. Okay? That's all it is. That's all it is. And a lot of people don't understand that. And it's at the heart of why people can't contend with like the N-word, for example. Why people can't understand why the N-word is such a powerful word. Because the N-word is a relitigation of white supremacist violence that was dished out towards black people. It's not simply just a mean word. Okay? On the other hand, though, white people that don't understand or don't want to actually contend with white supremacist violence think it's just a mean word. Oh, why can't we say this just simple mean word? Okay? It's not. It's not about black people's feelings being hurt because you said something mean. It is in line with propping up Robert E. Lee statues outside of the fucking courthouse, and not in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, but actually during the Civil Rights Movement. Why were people doing that? They were doing that to remind black people of the racial pecking order. Okay? That's it. And this concept is so difficult for a lot of people to comprehend or understand because virtually every aspect of our education is still dominated by white supremacist attitudes. Okay? So you never actually critically examine what white supremacy is, especially in the United States of America. That's it. Blackness, on the other hand, was, especially in America and in the Western world, but certainly in America more so than even the Western world, like the rest of the Western world, was a collective identity that was crafted through chattel slavery, through the domination and subjugation that occurred in chattel slavery. Because black people usually cannot trace their lineage all the way back to their ancestral tribes or whichever country that they may be from. Why? Because of chattel slavery. Okay? So that's why there was a separate identity crafted which is still a socio-political construct, mind you, but it's one that actually has like tangible boundaries, something that you can define. Whiteness, on the other hand, you can't necessarily define in the same way. Whiteness can only be defined by what it's not, its proximity to blackness. Okay? Anyway, that's why these concepts are different, but people don't want to, people don't understand it. Like white people, you know where you come from. You know what I mean? If you're a white person in America and you say I'm white, okay, you know where you come from. I know where I come from. I can trace my family back to Turkey, to different parts of Turkey, to the different parts of the Ottoman Empire. You can trace your lineage back to Ireland or England or France or whatever fucking Dutch country, like, Denmark or Finland or Germany, right? Black people, on the other hand, in the United States of America, African descendants of slaves cannot do that because of chattel slavery. So there is a separate identity that was concocted, crafted through this process of violence, systematic violence. Another thing to note is that whiteness also exists in direct contrast to blackness, another constructed race that can also expand and contract. Surely it largely contains black Americans of African descent, but it can also apply to Caribbean immigrants, for example. I know where I come from, but you avoid my comment. I'm Somali Muslim. Am I black or Arab? Moreover, my country Somalia is divided because of clans. Dollar, dollar, dollar. I know where I come from, but you avoid my comment. I don't avoid your comment. Oh, I can't. Dude, you're just not white. That's it. Okay? When you're in America, you are not white. Depending on what kind of racism you are about to endure in that moment, you can be a Muslim, Arab style person or a black person. In most circumstances, you are, however, black. Ducking the smoke, classic Hasan. You don't have to walk that plank. I'm not walking that plank at all.
The first ones I saw from a creator saying, my terrible date with an Indian man. And she just talks about like a bad dating experience she had with a man. But this is titled about an Indian man. And also she tells people she's not going to date Indian men going forward because of this one Indian guy she dated. So that's just a little snippet of the comments you'll see. But here's the worst one. And it happened to another high profile YouTuber. So Mutahar, Some Ordinary Gamers, he wrote this earlier this year, right? And he quit Twitter because of the constant racism he got. He says, the Gordon Ramsay State Restaurant at Vegas is the most unseasoned dog shit on a plate. Fuck this fraud, and all of us for gassing this up. I'm beyond disappointed. Anytime this Brit yells about salt on his show, I'm going to remember today. So just the guy talking about Gordon Ramsay's restaurant being bad. I've actually watched recently, for some strange reason, there's a British guy who's been reviewing like Gordon Ramsay restaurants, and he says all of them are shit, right? British guy, white British guy. You can guess that most of the comments that he gets are just agreeing with him. This is the comments he gets. Raj eats good meat, but can't taste the cow shit and piss covering it, and suffered no cases of food poisoning for the first time in his stinky life. Every week, Twitter puts this bunch of slurs, stupid face on my page without my consent. Every time I see this obese, filthy Indian on the timeline, he's swearing 27 times in a sentence, and I can only imagine him saying it with an Indian accent, which makes it more funny than embarrassing. He's mad they didn't poop on his plate. He found out the chef washes his hands. You're supposed to taste the steak. Again, a bunch of slurs. I'm just showing you this. It's just absolutely unhinged racism. Because a guy said he didn't like steak from Gordon Ramsay. And he happened to be from a South Asian background. So therefore, everyone was racist to him for this tweet. Because online, people are just looking for any reason to be racist to South Asians.
The difference is if a white dude said that instead of Mutahar, and it's a valid fucking complaint, okay, they just wouldn't have this angle of attack. That's it. That's how it works. And that, in its simplest way, is how anti-white racism doesn't exist in the same vein as like racism dished out towards non-whites.
Mainly Indians, and as you saw some of the comments there, it's because of this perception of all Indians being like super unhygienic, all Indians like not washing their hands, like all the stereotypes you've heard about Indians based on like slums you might see in films like Slumdog Millionaire, or stuff you might hear from charity workers who have gone to India and talk about the poverty and the hygiene. But as I've said, and not that most of you watching this need to hear this, you can't base an entire like culture, you can't base an entire like nation on like this anecdotal stuff that you see in like certain movies and everything. And also like, I say racist and people will say, oh, Indian is not a race. Like, what do you mean? What kind of Indian? Do you mean Punjabi Sikhs? Do you mean Gujarati Hindus or Jains or something? Like, what do you mean? And we all know none of these racists give a shit about any of this. To them, an Indian person is someone from India and is brown. It's the same with the racialized stereotype of what a Muslim person is. A Muslim is someone who is Arab, maybe Central Asian, has a beard, and all that stuff that goes with it, right? So it's a racialized stereotype of an Indian, which they use to color their like racist attacks against everyone. So we're going to talk about the Canadian stuff a bit later, but I'm just speculating now why this surge in racism against Indians seems to be happening. Now, like I said, there are legit
Something that really eats at racist whites is they have a deep envy for a shared experience that POC groups have because whites only have class, but we're not taught to understand class, so that turns into racial animus. Sorry for the essay. No, it's 100% correct. I have noticed this as well, that like for a lot of racist white people, their shared collective identity is like literally McDonald's burger. It's pointing to burger from 1950s rather than burger from 2024. Burger from 2024 doesn't hit the same. Burger from 1950 hit better. That's why so many of these fucking racist Twitter accounts will oftentimes post idiotic fucking reference points like 1950s advertising to be like, oh, we must return. They just have nothing to attach to. And it's ironic because, yes, your class position could actually make up for that problem. Also, regardless of my differences in opinion with Mudahar or how I dislike that he cultivates an audience of people that would then turn around and be racist to him, it's still completely inappropriate to be racist to him on the virtue of, you know, him being Indian. Like, it's fucking ridiculous. And I've defended Mudahar against that kind of racial animus time and time again. So just make no mistake there. You know what I mean?
Reasons to criticize the Indian government that represents, you know, 1.5 billion people. That's mainly for its fascist politics. The BJP as a political party are a fascist political party, and Indian Hindu nationalists are insanely pro-Israel. So you'll see that a lot on social media. Sometimes like the most pro-Israeli accounts on Twitter are actually Hindu nationalists. And as I pointed out for a long time, I've been tweeting about this for years. So I actually made a video about this maybe like 4 years ago. A lot of Israelis don't actually want this support because they're racist against Indians as well. Surprise, surprise. And I'll put some examples on screen for you there. And we'll talk about all that drama with the Canadian government a bit later as well. But I also think part of it now is people who don't know anything about India or have never really been exposed to Indian culture are finally being exposed to Indian culture through a certain lens on things like TikTok and Instagram Reels. Because if you type in like Indian travel content, you're going to get like a certain perception of India.
Oh.
And you have certain creators, mainly from white countries, who go,
dude, it's so fucked up. It's always like street food stuff where they're just like, oh, this is so gross and so nasty
there, and they share their perspectives. And if you are already
meanwhile, like Indian cuisine is literally peak. Like it's straight up. I will say this: it carries the UK in general. Okay, it is basically the doner kebab of Germany, but for the UK. And it's crazy that so many people just like cope and go like, oh, in these like very poor neighborhoods, it's done with like you know, not the best sanitized conditions or whatever the fuck. And it's like, yeah, you're just coping, dude.
Like have a racial bias, you're probably going to seek out the content that confirms your biases about India being a shithole, basically. And if you don't have any exposure to any cultures from India, or know anything about India, or know anyone who comes from like South Asia, you probably will believe all this stuff you see if you see people making content in slums. So for me personally, it's actually kind of a weird one. Like I said at the start, being a person who like grew up in like a South Asian area, to see all this insane racism from a country that you feel was like kind of similar in Canada. So for those of you who watch my videos, you might have seen me wear a Brentford shirt before. Brentford is a Premier League club, mainly based in Ealing, but if you're from Hounslow Borough, you'll probably support Brentford if it's a local football club, because that's our biggest like West London club. We have like QPR kind of near as well, but Brentford's the main one. Do a lot of work in the local community. If you played Sunday League growing up in Hounslow, like I did, you play Brentford junior teams. Even last season when I was doing Sunday League training, I used to train on pitches next to the Brentford youth teams. Like if you live around here, grow up here, you will see Brentford. So yeah,
dude,
I support.
Yeah, look. Here's the example. Look at that. What happened to architecture? Seriously, just take a look at this picture of a McDonald's taken in 1850. Oh, what the fuck? You mean this is a fucking meme, chatter? You literally sent a fucking. You're so dumb.
Brentford, and I was actually looking.
There's like a million fucking examples of like accounts such as that one. Not that one, but like there are a million examples of fucking Twitter accounts that like actually point to like white family in advertising, and you literally turned around and sent your own fucking account probably on Twitter where you're memeing
at the South Asian population, because I went to school in Hounslow. I didn't live there. I lived close by in a neighbouring borough, but I went to school there. Hounslow is a very big migrant area, and my parents, children of Irish migrants who were born in Ealing, which again has quite a big South Asian population. But Hounslow, Southall, all around this area, a lot of Indian people, a lot of South Asian people. And I was actually looking up the percentages in Hounslow, the demographic breakdown. So you have like Asian British, or Asian Welsh is 36% of the Hounslow population, which is compared to 9.6% of the general population of the UK. And the white population is 44% compared to 81% of the UK, where like Black British and Black Welsh, Caribbean, and African is about 7%. If you've seen films like Bend It Like Beckham, that's literally filmed around like places I've seen before. Like, it is a film that was filmed partly in Hounslow. My girlfriend's granddad was actually an immigrant from India as well to Hounslow. He had to flee India because of the partition and stuff. So I went to school with a lot of South Asians. One of my best friends is South Asian as well. His family are from Gujarat, but he is just...
My favorite dumb racist Twitter discourse that Indian food uses spice because the ingredients are supposedly low quality. Yeah. That is the level of cope. The level of cope on that fucking sentiment is ridiculous, dude. You should be destined to a lifetime of eating boiled chicken or whatever the fuck they're eating in your country, okay? Oh my Lord. Like, there are certain types of meat that you're not supposed to fucking season, okay? A5 Wagyu. You're not supposed to season it. Just a little bit of salt will do, because the marbling is excellent, okay? But the average meat or poultry that you consume does need fucking seasoning, okay? That's it.
as English as I am, or should I say he's just as Indian as I am Irish. But even in that, I was thinking about making this video. How he's perceived by the UK or the world is just Indian because of his skin color, right? Well, I'm perceived as English because even though we both have a similar accent, growing up in like a similar part of London and stuff like that, people do not see him as English where people see me as English. And what I'm trying to say is I grew up in like a very South Asian influenced culture at a time where racism against South Asians, particularly in Hounslow, wasn't like a really massive thing because it was actually replaced. And during my parents' like upbringing, that was a big thing, anti-South Asian racism. But it was actually replaced when I was growing up by anti-Muslim racism, which although can often encompass South Asians, all talking about like the clash between Islam and Western values. And in British society, at this point, I would say Indian culture is an accepted part of British identity for most people, especially because in most urbanized places, there is a big South Asian influence, and that stems from obviously the British Empire. And obviously a lot of British people say chicken tikka masala. It's the national dish of Britain. So happen in Canada right now. And of course you have like Jagmeet Singh, who himself is like visibly a Sikh man as well. And he was born to Indian immigrant parents in Canada. So I'm guessing a lot of Canadians probably thought like with the British, oh, like South Asians are part of our identity. Like, look at us, we have, you know, this tolerance because one of the leaders of a party is from a South Asian background. But what has happened recently is a variety of things in Canadian politics, mainly revolving around the Indian government and also the rise in Indian immigration. So I just want to talk about the government thing a little bit, because I don't think this is necessarily like relevant to a lot of the xenophobia. I do think it's an interesting background because it plays more into the mind of like, we cannot trust people coming from India because they're like attacking like Sikh people in the community, and they're just like, you know, literally attacking Canadians, right? So this came out today. Canada alleges Indian minister behind plot to target Sikh separatists. So the Canadian government has publicly alleged that India's Home Affairs Minister, Amit Shah, the Prime Minister Modi's closest political ally, was behind a recent series of plots to murder and intimidate Sikh separatists on Canadian soil. Testifying before a parliamentary committee, the Canadian Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister, David Morrison, acknowledged he had leaked information to the Washington Post about Shah's alleged role in a campaign of violence against the Sikh diaspora over the last few years. Morrison confirmed he had given the information to a newspaper, which then published a story last month naming Shah. The allegations follow an explosive press conference last month where senior Canadian police officials accused India's ambassador to Canada, as well as several senior diplomats and consular staff, of involvement in criminal activities in Canada, including extortion, intimidation, and harassment. They allege that the threats were primarily against the members of the Indian Sikh diaspora community living in Canada. Senior police officials have also accused Indian diplomats of being involved in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Sikh separatist activist who was gunned down outside of Gurdwara in the suburb of Vancouver last year. Canada expelled the Indian diplomats in response. India followed suit, with senior Canadian diplomats told to leave Delhi within the week as relations between the two countries hit historic lows. So a lot of Canadians are generally like insanely racist, and I think they get a pass as a country for being racist far more than others. Like the UK at the moment internally has a far worse reputation for racism than like Australia or Canada, where I actually think Canada and Australia are actually worse because of the settler colonial ideology and how they treat and view native peoples, as well as how the older group view immigrants from everywhere. Like, I've even heard people from Ireland saying they face like loads of shit in Australia, which is like so funny considering the history of Australian colonization as like a penal colony that loads of Irish people were sent to in the first place, like nearly 200 years ago. So you have all that stuff anyway, but that is just like a bit of political background for like the recent surge in anti-Indian sentiment in Canada itself. It's the Modi government, which is like a far-right Hindu nationalist government targeting Sikh activists, and obviously you have visible Sikhs in political parties, and it's just this massive row that has been going on, which is like really, really crazy that these countries are meant to be like somewhat allies, and the Indian government are doing this to Sikh communities across Canada. But obviously you can't tie that directly towards xenophobic sentiment towards what a lot of, you know, Canadians view as Indians, because to a lot of Canadians, how do they really know who is someone like Singh, who is obviously like the children of immigrants, so he was born in Canada, and someone who came like yesterday? How do people know? They don't know. They just see brown person and they're like, oh my God, my country's being destroyed by Indians. And you're actually going to hear that sentiment in a lot of posts I'm going to read you from social media. But just again, a bit more context about the surge in Indian migration to Canada. So just on immigration Canada, Indian immigration to Canada surges 326% in a decade. The number of Indians coming to Canada has experienced a fourfold increase since 2013. The National Foundation for American Policy found that highly skilled foreign nationals, including international students, especially from India, are choosing Canada over the US. In fact, the number of Indian immigrants rose from 32,000 to 139,000 from 2013 to 2023, which is a 326% increase in a 10-year span. This is largely because it is difficult to obtain H-1B status in the US, while temporary status and PR are easy to acquire in Canada. While Canada has fast processing for most highly skilled temporary visas, the H-1B lottery rejects most applicants in the pool, causing many to return home after completing their university studies in the US. Moreover, while Canada allows a skilled graduate to gain PR and eventual citizenship in just a few years' time, highly skilled immigrants from India and the US often have to wait decades. It also just talks about in the article how Canada is attractive for international students and grads and stuff from loads of different countries, but of course it's focused more on India for a variety of reasons. And it's obviously a part of the Canadian government wanting more skilled migrants in to maintain a certain level of economic growth. So this video is probably getting a bit too long, but I just want to talk about immigration from like a left-wing perspective. So of course, what we've seen throughout Western countries is a lot of capitalist businessmen have moved manufacturing jobs, for example, from like the UK, Canada, and America, and they moved them overseas to exploit cheaper foreign labor just to make more money, right? And that's how you saw, even with things like the rise of China and the rise of Indian economies, it's that Western corporations have said, you know, I don't want to pay a British citizen minimum wage or whatever the market rate is. Let's move it all over to a country where we can pay them less. And obviously in the UK, something that happened massively under Margaret Thatcher and continued under various governments, like devastated loads of local communities. But also in capitalist economies, historically, they do like cheap foreign migrant labor. Now, I remember, I think it was during COVID, because we had such a shortage of people doing like manual labor on farms, we actually like made some special deal to import loads of Romanian workers to do it because loads of British people didn't want to do it. And you see that a lot with like various different capitalist economies, the US being a...
I hate you so much, you're ruining Twitch. He said ruining. He didn't even write ruining Twitch.
For example, they rely on illegal immigrants to do a lot of vital jobs, and also they pay them like shit as well and keep
Y'all shouldn't have banned him. I wanted to know what he meant. Like, how am I ruining Twitch?
their status.
Have a little fun with it.
So they can threaten like literally kicking them out of the country if they don't accept these terrible wages. And that's an
okay. I'm a little bored. We've covered the